everyone. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you for joining me on this session today around pushing the boundaries of leadership with sustainability AI. Just before we get started, I'd quite like to get you just to think about, why is sustainability AI important to you? For me, I see technology and more at a more foundation level, data and AI, the kind of core tools we'll need to kind of push towards a more sustainable society. So an interesting fact for you, in a recent academic study from Microsoft and Goldsmiths University, from organisations interviewed, it was revealed almost 60% of organisations will struggle to meet net zero targets by 2050. And this is quite a shocking revelation, but it's not entirely surprising. From a lot of the kind of interactions we have with businesses on a day-to-day, it's quite clear that there has been quite a rapid uptake and a lot of different tools kind of coming towards organisations, a lot of different regulations now starting to come about, and it can be quite an overwhelming space with the amount of information being put out there through the news, through blogs, through videos, through webinars, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. It is quite a complex area. So one of the aims of, or the key takeaways I hope you gain from this talk today, is for me to be able to break down some of that noisy information and inspire others to use data and AI to influence change towards sustainability. So a little bit about me. They say pictures tell 1,000 words. So I hope this gives you a little bit of insight. My background is in neuroscience. For most of my career, I have been working in data science and cloud consultancy. And for the last couple of years, since 2018, I've been working towards developing technology solutions in the sustainability space, originally starting within renewables and more recently working on ESG products. So I was quite happy to receive the Microsoft MVP award towards the latter end of last year. And that is kind of tied to a lot of the community work I do, running Data Science London meetups quite regularly, blogging and doing talks. So when I'm not challenging myself in the technical arena, I do like to push the boundaries on the more physical side of things. But feel free to check out the meetup group, the blog, or reach out to me via Twitter if you'd like to discuss anything sustainability or technology related. So in terms of an agenda today, I'm going to start with what makes good sustainability leadership. And then we're going to look at how can we instill power skills within the teams that we have around us. We're going to then start breaking down a lot of that noisy information around ESG frameworks, regulation and carbon markets. So whilst that is all very domain specific, that is critical information that we need to consider before embarking on developing any kind of technology related products or tools that are really going to be used to push change towards sustainability. And then finally, we'll discover some of the art of the possible in terms of what can be done with technology, and take a deeper dive, specifically focusing on emissions. So a recent kind of conference board CEO challenge survey interviewed around 80 different organisations, and those executives put forward some common themes as to what they think makes good sustainability leadership. And if we take a closer look at them, the first kind of pillar is active engagement. So as I kind of mentioned, climate change, sustainability has become a megatrend. We hear a lot of information about it in the news, in media generally. And it's important not just to have that awareness, but also to be actively engaged, to really consider, how do all of these changes impact my business? The second kind of pillar is building on active engagement and actually leading by example. So whilst a lot of C-suite leaders have great ambitions, they don't necessarily always have the time to dedicate to see progressive change. But there are two really simple ways that organisations have started to do this. And the first one is simply by reporting on sustainability performance. So understanding, taking in those data sources and understanding where performance is good, where improvements need to be made. And the second thing is through the onboarding of internal or external advice, either through the onboarding of the Chief Sustainability Officer or through seeking some external objective advice on sustainability performance. The third pillar is around strategic planning, and investors kind of often cite that the risk associated with mitigating and adapting towards climate change is one of the biggest risks they see when looking to make sustainable investments. So by actually engaging in strategic planning and considering the issues that are actually material to the business, you kind of provide external validation and confidence to people looking more closely at your business. The fourth pillar is ambitious long-term goals, and this kind of is particularly looking at not just what is considering business as usual and compliance. It is kind of pushing the boundaries. Let's go one step further. Let's innovate what is also great, not just for the business, but also for society more broadly. The fifth pillar is executive compensation tied to sustainability performance. And naturally, if we are incentivized to perform towards certain goals, we're more likely to focus more attention, more resource, more capital allocation, which is realistically more likely to see actual change and progression towards those sustainability goals. The sixth pillar is innovation. And this is, again, kind of moving away from business as usual and looking for opportunities, whether that's through working with customers in a different way or suppliers, or developing new partnering opportunities to really challenge the status quo and push the boundaries of what can be done. And you're likely to see much stronger resiliency and growth in revenue as a result. And the final kind of pillar, as I've touched on, is reporting. So by just putting out there transparently how you're performing on a sustainability spectrum, you show that sustainability is instilled and ingrained within your organisation at a cultural level as well. And there are goals that everybody is actively working towards, which again, not only fills investors with confidence, but also gives consumers that validation that they need as well. So whilst I have kind of spoke predominantly around this being a top-down approach, it is, in my opinion, very much a bi-directional approach, essentially. So this could also feed from the bottom up. The C-suite and kind of people whose roles and functions are core and kind of pivotal to the leadership, obviously do need to encompass a lot of these kind of considerations, but they're not going to have a holistic overview of the day-to-day granularity of things that are impacting the business. So as we'll kind of go on to see, there are a lot of skills within teams, including a lot of these considerations that we've mentioned here, that can be used to push sustainability forward. At its most simple definition, leadership is the power to influence change, which doesn't necessarily have to be an entrepreneurial thing. It can be across the entire workforce. So whilst those pillars provide us a great initial step, sustainability leadership is difficult, and the nature of sustainability is naturally complex. It is something that has gained a lot of urgency and momentum in the last couple of years, and the pressure to develop tools and products is rapidly progressing. So the sustainability itself has a lot of interconnected issues that are dynamically changing over time. And it really takes a cognitively diverse team to take that multifaceted approach to really deliver change. In addition to that, there are kind of broader workforce changes. We're now, since the COVID-19 pandemic, we're dealing with a distributed workforce. There are new business models. There are new societal expectations on how we should work. And that is just adding to the complexity of sustainability leadership. So I just want to take a few minutes here just to take a deeper dive into those sustainability roles and exactly what are the roles and functions from a sustainability point of view. and how does technology kind of play into this? So starting with the CEO and kind of working clockwise, the CEO has the role to kind of define the future visions and strategy. They will be in charge of kind of identifying threats and opportunities from a sustainability point of view and setting those ambitious long-term goals. So we are going to reach net zero by 2030, and this is our roadmap to it. The Chief Financial Officer will be looking to highlight sustainability impacts in terms of financial planning, reporting, compliance, and capital allocation. And then we have the Chief Operations Officer, who will be dealing with all things supply chain, not only looking at how you can optimize costs, but also how you can reduce your carbon impact. And then we have the Chief Technical Officer, who again has a kind of dual role. Not only are they in charge of kind of breaking down those data silos that all the different business units may have to bring together the sustainability data into a common data lake to drive goal setting and sustainability reporting, but they will also need to be kind of setting in processes to look closely at how technology is developed in a sustainable way. So that might be looking at kind of forecasting cloud expenditure, looking at whether data science and AI models need a specific level of accuracy, how are they going to be provisioned, what is the precision even required, and is it necessary? Is that trade-off kind of really needs to be considered in terms of business development and also emissions management. And then we have the Chief Commercial Officer, who is kind of in charge of building that brand and sales and marketing messaging around sustainability, kind of ensuring that customers and investors are happy with products that are out there and ensuring that the brand reputation is in line with the sustainability goals of the organisation. And then we have the Chief Sustainability Officer, which is a relatively new role, and they're in charge of essentially monitoring and managing progress towards those sustainability goals. They also have the power to veto and challenge any kind of decisions that conflict with the organisational sustainability strategy. And then we have the Chief HR Officer, whose responsibility and function is to really embed those sustainability preferences within the company culture through training and through talent acquisition. So whilst we can kind of see the diverse roles within leadership that all need to take sustainability into consideration amongst the many of the kind of functions and roles they have, there is one kind of common thread amongst all of them, and that is the need to use data and technology to really manage change and drive sustainability forward. So if we take a closer look at that and just consider supply chain data, for example, a CFO would look at that in terms of maybe considering relevant mergers and acquisitions and investment opportunities. A Chief Operational Officer would look at that to see, do our procurement contracts allow us to gain emissions data from our suppliers? If not, could we maybe work together to kind of create that data sharing agreement and then really assess whether we can maybe innovate to reduce those emissions further? And then we have the Chief Commercial Officer, who will be looking at the supply chain data from a branding point of view. Is there any reputational risk for greenwashing? Have we sourced things in ethical ways? Have we paid people fairly? So as you can see, the same types of data can be kind of viewed from multiple different viewpoints. Okay, so we've considered sustainability leadership. Now I'm just going to take a brief look at some of the power skills, tactical skills, and technical skills that can be built within teams. So first of all, power skills include things like communication and teamwork, leadership and management, productivity and collaboration, and personal development and wellness. And these are kind of typical soft skills. I like to refer to them as power skills. They aren't, they're predominantly tied to a lot of leadership roles, but more and more we're seeing that they are being kind of offered to the entire workforce as kind of development areas to work on. A recent study by PwC actually showed that organisations that provide leadership training to every member of the organisation, irrespective of their role, are 4.2 times more likely to see revenue growth, which is quite interesting. And then we have tactical skills. So this is things like business intelligence, finance and accounting, talent development, marketing, project management, sales and customer experience. And this provides most people with kind of more of a holistic working of a business and enables you to kind of just have a well-oiled machine. It's also seen by some as a protective method towards churn by just giving people a bit more variation in terms of their roles as well. And then we have technical skills, which include things like cloud computing, cybersecurity, data science, IT operations, and software development. And technical skills are kind of how we essentially action change. This is something, again, that is being kind of widely adopted across many different roles to really action change. For example, if we take a HR officer, they would actively use data to understand whether training is being effective, whether incentive schemes are actually incentivizing their workforce, are they actually using those schemes? And obviously they would want to keep that in a secure way to feed that back to ensure that there is no kind of bias or kind of discrimination as well. So there are multiple areas in which technology and technical skills are really important too. So we've kind of considered leadership. Now I'm going to start working through some of that core noisy information that often organisations are overwhelmed with when starting on their sustainability journey, so that we can actually take those into consideration when we go on to talk about some of the art of the possible with technology. So starting with ESG frameworks. So there are multiple ESG frameworks around, which can vary in multiple different ways. And likewise, there are hundreds and hundreds of ESG scoring providers, which will rest on different frameworks. One of the kind of common questions we often get asked is, which framework should I align to? And that very much depends. I will kind of break down a kind of overview of how they differ, predominantly using this infographic that I've put together. And essentially they can differ across two main spectrums, which are in terms of the scope of information and advice that they provide. So you'll get some that provide very broad scope information on environment, social and governance, and then others that have a very specific focus, just maybe on climate or a specific industry. And then the second kind of parameter which they can differ across is how much guidance they actually provide. So they can differ in terms of providing a lot of detailed guidance, in some cases down to the very units of metrics that should be collected. And in other cases, they can kind of just loosely be aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I'll start in the top right-hand corner with GRI and SASB. These are the kind of two most commonly used ESG frameworks. And GRI has kind of been around since 1997. They had their first framework reported in 2000, and they are also really comprehensive, really detailed. I think the document that goes through all of the kind of metrics and data that can be captured is around 600 pages. So you get a lot of information in there. And again, it aligns really well to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, on the other hand, is also really, really detailed and comprehensive, but they differ from GRI in that they also provide industry-specific metrics and units. So they cover 77 industries. Moving further on to the kind of right-hand side, top right-hand side, we have TCFD and CDP, which are kind of more aligned to climate. There is increasingly some cross-pollination. So SASB and GRI are more and more using the TCFD framework to incorporate into a lot of their advice that they provide. So the CDP you can go onto the website, you can fill out the surveys, and they kind of assess across a few different environmental areas, including forestry and water security. And they will give you a rating also from A to F if you do wish to kind of adopt that type of framework. They have around 13,000 organisations across 1,100 different regions that have kind of adopted that framework. Then we have in the bottom left-hand corner, we have more specific focused frameworks like GRESB, which are kind of more tied to real estate. And then on the bottom right-hand corner here, we have more loose kind of defined frameworks, PRI, UN Global Compact, and the World Economic Forum, all provide kind of loose guidance, again, tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but they're not going to provide a lot of metric information that you should maybe collect. So just to give you a bit more kind of insight into what it might look like if you wanted to get started with using a an ESG framework. I'm just going to talk through one of the kind of tools we've developed over the last year or so briefly and show you essentially the dashboard so you can gain some insight as to what it might look like to start evaluating your own data from a sustainability point of view. So this tool uses the GRI ESG framework, and it's all open data that we have collected. So sustainability reports, some open asset data, social data, finance data, environment data, and news feeds. And this we've chosen to build on the Azure platform, so it all goes into our Azure data lake. And then we have several different features that we've kind of built. The kind of main key one that's producing the ESG scores is along this kind of workflow here. So we have some semi-automated location models, which kind of identify 186 different GRI metrics across environment, social, and governance. And then that's all kind of pre-processed. We apply a series of weights and normalization processes. Again, organizations can do that according to what is more material to them. And then you can kind of aggregate those to provide an ESG score. So our coverage is for the FTSE 100, and we output one ESG score, the 3 pillar scores for environment, social, and governance, theme scores, sub-theme scores, and we also expose all of the metrics. And we do that each year for each of the FTSE 100 companies. And we also have some machine learning built in there to forecast what is the ESG score likely to be for the year ahead. In addition to that, we've kind of got some other features, which include looking at climate risk. And then we also have a whole bunch of sequential NLP models, which kind of eventually allow us to output a controversy score. So that will be taking in things like news and social data to work out what is the sentiment, what company is it referring to, what controversy class is it actually referring to, and all that information again will be weighted and scored. So that all kind of goes into our staging area of our data lake, and then it's curated for people to consume either by API or through Power BI. So I'll just take a quick moment to show you that in a bit more detail. So this is the overall page, and it's kind of broken down into the overall ESG data. You can view that at a industry level or a company level. And then we have the kind of sentiment and controversy scoring and the climate risk stuff. So I'm only going to show one kind of area which focuses on outputting that a GRI kind of reporting framework. And here we've selected banks as our industry. We can see the missing data according to those different banks. So we don't send out any kind of questionnaires to gain additional information. It's only what is credibly sourced in the public domain. And you can see the environment, social, and governance scores at the pillar level. There you get a time series and can see change year on year as well. So if we just take a quick look at the kind of themes, there are 8 themes that we cover, and you can see as an industry as a whole how banks perform in terms of climate change, workforce, shareholders, resource use, product responsibility, management, human rights, and CSR strategy. Just taking a more detailed view at the climate change metrics, we can go down to the very metric page, and we can see things like scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, GHG intensity, and you can kind of get a lot of detailed information as to how that's defined and calculated as well. So just going back, now we've kind of considered the ESG frameworks. I'm just going to go through a few more kind of really specific domain facts before we just start talking about how technology can be used effectively. So as well as ESG frameworks, there are also a lot of country level taxonomies that have come about. And we, whilst this is great, there is also the need for a kind of more unified taxonomy in order to have international progress towards sustainability. So they first come about to kind of support the use of green bonds, but we can see some of those common ground taxonomies coming about. So for example, the EU and China are working towards a common ground taxonomy that can be used more internationally through the International Panel for Climate Change. And then finally, we're just going to cover some of the common referenced sustainability regulations. So we have CSRD, SFDR, and the EU taxonomy. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview, as these are commonly kind of referred to in the sustainability space. So the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive builds on the non-financial reporting directive, and it aims essentially to strengthen and standardize the communication, the corporate communication on sustainability to help investors then meet the requirements of SFDR. And the main difference between CSRD and NFRD is kind of the scope. So we're now moved away from just covering 11,600 companies, and we have a much broader coverage of around 50,000 companies within the EU. And the main kind of disclosure points are around environmental protection, social responsibility and treatment of employees, respect for human rights, anti-corruption, diversity of board members, and double materiality. And that final point kind of refers to not only considering what is sustainable from a business point of view, but also from a wider society point of view as well. The Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, SFDR, came into effect March of 2021, with level 2 expected to be applied this year. And it's essentially making it easier for investors by providing a common language in which they can compare the types of sustainable finance strategies and products available on the market. Most funds have actually been considering Article 3 and 6 of SFDR, which focuses on pre-contractual disclosures and website disclosures. So just to take a look at these in a bit more depth, we have integration of sustainability risks in investment decisions, assessment impact of sustainability risks on the return of a financial product, the rationale, so where sustainability is deemed not to be relevant, the rationale as to why is kind of communicated. And then on the website publications, policies of integration of sustainability risks in decision making are kind of expected to be disclosed. And then finally, the EU taxonomy, which is really comprehensive. We kind of have so that came into force in July 2020, and it's to be evaluated July of this year and every 3 years after. It requires investors to kind of disclose the proportion of economic activity that qualifies as environmentally sustainable. And they have 6 environmental objectives. Apologies, one is missing from there. We have climate change mitigation, adaptation, the kind of protection of water and marine resources, transition towards a secular economy, and the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So whilst investments can be kind of directed towards any one of those 6 objectives, or even a few of them, there is the kind of additional clause of do no significant harms to ensure that the other kind of 4 or 5 objectives are kind of not harmed as a result of the alignment to one objective. And then the second kind of clause is minimum safeguards. So whilst this is a really great comprehensive classification system, it is not entirely, there's still a lot of work to be done. So a recent study by the FTSE Russell Group found that when the ESG 300 environment ESG metrics were mapped onto the do no significant harm technical screening criteria, only 43 mapped. So there have been calls from other people, from various other people, to kind of use in the interim other data sources such as controversy data. And the final kind of point to make on this slide here is kind of this figure here, which is taken from that FTSE Russell study, and it kind of shows the decision points within consideration of investment into electricity generation from geothermal energy sources. So you align your objectives, you apply the technical screening criteria, and then you ensure minimum safeguards have been met in order to pass and say that an investment is aligned to the EU taxonomy. And then finally, we have voluntary carbon markets. So what is voluntary offsetting? As a lot of organisations are kind of scrambling to meet net zero targets, a lot of investment has been put into offsetting those emissions. There are 2 types of carbon markets. So there is the compliance market, which essentially uses permits and carbon pricing to kind of offset. And then we have the voluntary carbon market, which is where people are investing in things like direct air capture and tree planting to offset their emissions. So the UK funded task force for scaling voluntary carbon markets, led by the former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney, has kind of estimated that the demand for the voluntary carbon market will increase a further 15-fold by 2030 to over $50 billion. So whilst this is great, obviously offsetting in this way is not a scalable thing. The unprecedented scale that would be required to actually provide the levels of offsetting required for a lot of organisations is not realistic. So we actually do need to do a lot of hard work still to actually really change our business processes. But that's not to say offsetting can't be part of the overall plan. Whilst that's the case, there is obviously voluntary carbon markets are not regulated. So there is the risk of a lot of fraud. A recent study by Carbon Plan, for example, showed that an organisation in California received over $400 million in offsetting funds and hadn't removed a single ton of carbon from the environment. And likewise, climate scientists often cite that the actual accounting and verification process of the fact that a ton of carbon has been removed from the atmosphere is also quite challenging. So now we've kind of considered a lot of those kind of domain-specific information. We can really take into consideration how we can use that information to develop technical products and tools to help us drive towards sustainability. And I'm going to go back to the kind of C-suite role just to get an idea of the multifaceted ways in which AI and analytics can be used specifically. So technology is a broad spectrum and it includes things like IoT, cloud computing, blockchain, VR, but I'm just focusing here on specifically how analytics and AI can be used. So again, starting with the CEO, they may want to look at specific trends around regulation, sentiment to understand how their competition is performing, how their own reputation is affected by specific sustainability trends. So you can set up early warning sentiment models and early warning signals through machine learning there. We have the CFO, who is likely to want to predict and forecast return on investment of relevant mergers and acquisitions, forecast the valuation of the company, and even set up a kind of early pre-qualification of candidates for mergers and acquisitions. We have the Chief Operations Officer, who can leverage AI in multiple ways again. You can look at optimizing waste management. You can simulate supply chain life cycle analysis using sensors and satellites. There's a little bit of crossover with IoT there. And you might even want to do some predictive maintenance as well. The CTO would want to forecast initially cloud architecture costs, and maybe even kind of automate the assessment and forecasting of the performance of specific AI models. So whether AI models should even be developed according to business needs. So that is also something that can be done using data, historical data of those types of projects. The Chief Commercial Officer would obviously want to look at the sentiment of how they're perceived at an organisational level. So they're in charge of the brand and sales and marketing kind of messaging, the reputational risk. So they would even maybe want to look at some product A/B testing as well, if new designs are coming about. And then the Chief Sustainability Officer would want to forecast and predict the company's ESG score and their controversy score. And then we have the HR officer, who would want to predict maybe employee churn, understand sentiment from employee feedback surveys, forecast the effectiveness of training and incentive programs as well. So again, a multitude of ways of where technology can be used and developed to really help us meet our sustainability goals. So for the final part, I just want to focus on where a lot of attention is being directed within the sustainability industry, and that is around the transition to net zero. So when we refer to net zero, we're essentially talking about the balancing act. So it's not the fact that organisations are not producing emissions, but they are essentially balancing those through offsetting and other means so that their net output is zero. And kind of emissions can be broken down into scope 1, 2, and 3. So when we refer to scope 1, we're talking about the greenhouse gas emissions made directly through running your boilers or your vehicles at an organisational level. Scope 2, GHG emissions refer to those that are made indirectly through purchasing of services, such as heating or cooling buildings, where emissions are produced on behalf of the organisation. And scope 3 is quite broad spectrum, covering all indirect emissions that are not associated with the company itself, and they can be up and down the value chain. So on the upside, they can include the emissions produced from suppliers, and on the downstream side of things, the emissions used from consumers as a result of using the products that your organisation produces. So an interesting report from the CDP actually has reported that supply chain emissions themselves are on average 11.4 times greater than scope 1 direct emissions for organisations. So whilst it's a lot of organisations are putting a lot of effort into reporting scope 1 and 2, scope 3 is naturally more difficult, but that's not to mean that we should disregard it. We should kind of start our efforts towards looking how we can use technology to start reporting on scope 3. And I'm just going to share with you in a few moments some of the ways that we've kind of been doing that. So just to kind of give a bit more detail on scope 3, there are kind of 15 subcategories that make up scope 3 emissions here. So we have everything from purchased goods and services, upstream and downstream transportation and distribution, waste generated in operations, business travel, employee commuting, end-of-life treatment of sold products, downstream leased assets, franchises and investments. So the specific scope 3 emissions that I'm going to focus on how you can start reporting on is business travel and employee commuting. So whilst there will be quite a large task and effort in kind of developing data sharing agreements to ensure that you can start reporting on scope 3, business travel and employee commuting are two areas where we see it's like an easy, quick win essentially to start reporting. So the way that we've kind of done this is obviously people will kind of apply for expenses through our HR system. So things like flights and kind of a petrol for car use travel can be expensed through our HR system. So all those receipts will be in there. But we've also put out some kind of wider workforce employee surveys to understand where are people kind of commuting from to, what is the distance travelled, what is the mode of transport, what is the class of transport, and are there kind of any layovers, etc. So all of that information is kind of gathered from those two different streams. And then depending on the source, we either use the inbuilt AI from Microsoft Forms Recognizer or a Logic app to extract all that information into storage. We then clean all of that data and apply the government conversion factors to report on scope 3 emissions for employee commuting and business travel. So as you can kind of see here in 2019, we had around 3,000 kilograms of CO2. And with the pandemic, that has dropped to in 2020 and 2021. So that's great. The natural, I guess, conclusion would be let's move to a hybrid mode of working. Whilst we have adopted that, it's not as clear cut as saying that's the decision we're going to make. There are also other considerations that need to be made. For example, if you have a smart building with IoT sensors, which is actively regulating the temperature, the lighting, etc., for 20 people within a team, that's great. If they're at home, they might not be in well-insulated houses, which requires more heating. They're then lighting and heating 20 individual rooms. Whether that offsets the commuting emissions is an important question to consider. So whilst it is quite complex when considering the hybrid way of working, I think starting to report on commuting is a great step in the right direction. So that brings me to the end of my talk. I hope you found it useful. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great International Women's Day and enjoy the rest of Techno. If you did enjoy the talk, feel free to reach out to me if you want to discuss anything further. And I'm also running a session on the 15th of March at the London Reactor going to focus on green AI and open source climate models. Thank you very much.